to see you. So, as you can see behind me, tonight we have the lovely bookshelf. So, that's nice. What we don't have tonight is the tripod. So, it's an interesting setup. It is me in front of the bookshelf, staring down into the lens of my iPhone. Interesting setup that we have tonight, but we shall prevail. Shout out to all of you. So glad that you're here. So glad that you're here. Always a pleasure to interact with all of you. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to hit the notifications bell, because if you hit that notifications bell, then you'll be alerted the next time that we're going to do one of these late night conversations that we always have. And here we go, folks. Glad we can enjoy ourselves here this evening. I guess I'll do the quick lowdown I always give you on how we start, which is that I always do my opening remarks, followed by the roll call, and that's when I call you out, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera, who is watching, because this is a growing community, and it's an exciting community that we have here on this YouTube channel. And then after I do the roll call, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how it works. That is how it works here on this channel. That's how we do things. That's just the way we do things. We might change at some point, but the way we do things on this channel, the way it's been working out so far, is to follow this format. So if you have a super chat question you would like me to answer, all you have to do is send me a super chat. And I will write it down. That's how it works. And that's the method to our madness here. That's the method to our madness. That's how our cookie crumbles. That's how we roll. It's late at night, but I've got plenty of unnamed water beverage. And I got to tell you, folks, fall is a very odd time of year for me. I woke up this morning feeling very tired. And, fall allergies, my nose is running. And it's like all day during the fall, I'm very tired. And it seems that just as the sun is going down, suddenly I gain my strength. It's weird. In the wintertime, when there's snow on the ground, it's generally when the sun is out that I feel all pumped up by the sun's rays. And then when it gets dark at night, I feel pretty tired. But for some reason, this fall time with the fall allergies, and I'm scratching my nose and blowing my nose. I apologize for that ahead of time, but I'm going to be on here for a long period of time. I'm going to have to scratch my nose every so often because these fall allergies make it difficult. It makes my skin a little red, and these fall allergies happen, and all day I'm just feeling tired. But then just as the sun goes down, and I suddenly start to feel energized, and I don't know how that works. Fall is a very odd season. We're coming up on the fall holiday of Halloween, right? That's the last day of October. October 31st will be Halloween. Halloween. Halloween, for those who don't know, the name Halloween is actually derived from a Christian, actually a Roman Catholic holiday. That may come as a surprise. When I was a kid, we were not allowed to have Halloween in our school because many of the evangelicals that I went to school with were very offended by Halloween. They associated Halloween with witchcraft and satanic stuff and whatever, so we had to have an autumn festival every year. Instead of having Halloween, we had an autumn festival in my little town because it was offensive to the religious people to have Halloween. But what's actually quite funny is that the name Halloween, it's derived from All Hallows Eve. All Hallows Eve, which is the night before All Saints' Day. All Saints' Day. Now, All Saints' Day is in the Roman Catholic Church It is the day that every person who died in the previous year is believed to go into heaven. They light candles for each person who died the previous year. So the myth of Halloween, right? It was at one point, like in the Middle Ages, believed, certainly not believed at this time, but it was believed in the Middle Ages at one point, that until All Hallows Eve, the ghosts of dead people were still on Earth, and it wasn't until All Saints' Day that they ascended into heaven. So Halloween, All Hallows Eve, was the last hurrah of the ghosts on Earth. It was their last night to be spirits haunting this world until they ascended into the next world on All Saints' Day. And, Halloween, as we celebrate it in the United States, it kind of parallels, in Latin America, they have a very different tradition. There's some overlap, but they have a very different tradition called the Day of the Dead. And, in Mexico, you talk about the skull masks and the parades and all of that. That's part of Central American and Mexican culture, is the Day of the Dead, right, where you decorate the graves of your dead relatives and you wear a skull mask, and it's kind of I don't even know. It's not my tradition, actually. Go and ask somebody from that culture what it's about. If I were to, I'm probably misrepresenting it here, and I don't want to do that. So you have that. And it's interesting to think about all of that. It's interesting to think about all of that, right? Because, so, when you think about holidays, okay? I mean, it's like, you got winter solstice, that's Christmas. Christmas is around the winter solstice. It used to be the pagan holiday of Yuletide. Then, you've got Easter, which is the spring equinox, right? And that used to be the May Day, the pagan festival of May Day, right? Which the maypole, they would dance around the maypole, etc. And it seems like Halloween is like a precursor, right? It's a precursor to the autumn festival, right? I mean, and that's what Thanksgiving really is. That's, it's the autumn festival. It's a lot like Sukkot, which is the Orthodox Jewish holiday where they build the huts, and it's about, ending the harvest. It's kind of a harvest festival. But Halloween comes before the harvest festival, right? Thanksgiving is the full-on harvest festival. You're having a big feast to basically commemorate that the harvest, you're a farmer, the harvest is in, and now it's time to eat a big feast. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to look at the parallels. And that brings me to an interesting thing I just learned. I didn't know this, but I am fascinated. I had no idea about this. And this actually does not relate to Halloween. It actually relates to May 1st, International Workers' Day, and I think it was called Beltane in the pagan tradition. And it was a Celtic holiday. It was a pre-Christian holiday. And then May 1st became International Workers' Day, celebrated by communists around the world. During the medieval years in England, a big part of the May 1st celebrations was the myth of Robin Hood. Did you know this? I didn't know this. When I was a kid, I loved Robin Hood, right? Something about the Robin Hood story, right? He's wearing green, and he's in the woods, and he's shooting bows and arrows, and he's fighting the Sheriff of Nottingham and King John. And he's robs from the rich and gives to the poor. Robin Hood, Robin Hood. It's just something about it. But I didn't realize, right? There was a book, there's like a classic novel that was published, I think, at some point in like the 1800s that was a compilation of Robin Hood legends. But the Robin Hood legend has very, very deep roots in England. And apparently, back in the Middle Ages, long before King Henry VIII, long before, the Protestant Reformation, back in the Middle Ages, they would celebrate the May 1st holiday. And every village, every town would have its little commemorations. And a performance of a play about Robin Hood, about this mythical character called Robin Hood, would be part of their celebrations of May 1st. And usually what would happen is that someone would dress in green and they would go around and pretend to rob people and get donations from people. And those donations would then be used for the festival and maybe to help out people in the area. And it was this myth. And no one really knows where the legend of Robin Hood started. And that there are many different, poems and ballads telling the story of Robin Hood. And the version of Robin Hood that we have now is completely changed, and they've inserted, King Richard the Lionheart, and Sir Robin of Locksley, and none of that. None of that has anything to do. I mean, it was just this weird story that became very, very popular in medieval Europe, or in medieval England in particular, not even in Scotland really, just in England. And it became this kind of play that they would perform around the time of May 1st as part of their May 1st celebrations to celebrate the spring equinox. And it was after Lent and Easter was over. They would celebrate May 1st, the summer's starting or whatever, and they would do little performances about this mythical character named Robin Hood. And some vague aspects of the Robin Hood story were part of these elaborate rituals that the people in the Middle Ages used to perform. It's kind of fascinating to think about, right? Robin Hood is thought of as a bandit, right? As someone who went around robbing people, but he's a good bandit, right? Back then there were a lot of bandits, right? Back then most people were peasants, and if you were a peasant and you did something wrong, one thing they might do is throw you off the land of the landowner, the noble, the lord or whatever might throw you off the land. So you really at that point had no choice but to be a bandit, because you couldn't grow crops and you couldn't function within a feudal society. And bandits were not very nice people. They would rob people, they would kill people, they would rape them, they would murder them. Bandits were not good people. But Robin Hood is a bandit, but he's a nice bandit, and he only robs the rich, and he does so in kind of a joking, laughing way as he's making jokes, throughout the whole thing, and has kind of a grin and a wink and a nod, and he robs the rich and gives to the poor, and he's just a charming, charming good fellow. And that's the myth of Robin Hood, right? And the story develops. He's in love with Maid Marian, right? Who is she? We don't know, but he's in love with her. She's named Maid Marian. He's got a really tall, big, strong guy who's his assistant named Little John, ironically, because he is not little. He's got a priest who works with him, Friar Tuck, and he lives in the woods with his band of merry men, and they go around robbing people, but they're nice robbers, and they, instead of just keeping the loot for themselves, they give it to the poor people, and instead of targeting defenseless poor people themselves, they only target the decadent rich who are cruel to the poor, and that's the myth of Robin Hood. And what I find to be fascinating about it is that, it was obviously some kind of morality play, right? If the Robin Hood legend had somehow been a threat to feudalism, they probably wouldn't have allowed it, right? If the landlords and the nobles felt that the Robin Hood story was inciting the peasants to rise up and revolt, they would have stopped that immediately. So Robin Hood wasn't that. It wasn't a threat to the feudal order. Somehow it was part of the feudal society. It was part of their annual May celebrations. They would do this Robin Hood play, and the story got more and more complex until finally, years later in the 1800s, we have, stories about it and novels and epics, and now we have movies. We've got the Disney version. We've got the 1930s version with the epic sword fight at the end. They took the plot of Robin Hood and redid it to be set in California at the time the Spaniards occupied, and they called it Zorro. There's a million. I mean, Robin Hood is it's a story archetype, right? The story of a social bandit, right? A nice, friendly bandit who's a friend of the downtrodden and is always making the rich unhappy, right? The synthetic left of the medieval era, I wouldn't put it that way. you know, but, if the story of Robin Hood was somehow a threat to the feudal order, if people were listening to those Robin Hood stories and saying, yes, those nobles are evil, and yes, we ought to rise up, and that story would have been nixed immediately. But going through the motions of doing a Robin Hood story was just part of the way things did things. And it was kind of this, you can see tones in it. It's like kind of scolding the nobles, like, don't be too cruel to the poor people. That's not good. And it was kind of, kind of giving a social justice nod, right? Kind of a social justice nod. It was acknowledging that things were not fair between the nobles and the peasantry. That was true. It was acknowledging a lot of the injustice of society, but it was doing it in kind of a fun, comedic, silly, sarcastic way. Right? The fact that one of Robin Hood's assistants is a priest who likes to stuff his face full of food and is overweight. The fact that Robin Hood is a bandit, but he's a nice bandit, right? All of these things were commentary. They were satire of aspects of feudal society. There's perhaps a little bit of jest at the hypocrisy of the clergy, right? Because the fact that this priest, who's supposed to be so pious and so holy, has joined a band of bandits, and he's stuffing his face full of food, and he's fat. That's kind of hinting, it's kind of mocking, perhaps, some of the negative tendencies of the clergy. The fact that Robin Hood is robbing the nobles, and everyone thinks he's a hero for doing so, is hinting that there is resentment on the part of the peasants at the landowners, right? And the way that they tax people, right? And that taxation, you have to understand, the taxation that was the way the feudal lords lived, right? If you were a serf, you got to work the land, but at the end of the year, you had to give a percentage of what you got, of what you produced, to the landlord as your tax. And the feeling of the peasants was always that it was unfair, right? They did all this work. What did the Lord do? He just had, divine right. He owned the land because the church said so, or because the king said so, and they just had to give him. He didn't do any work. Right? And the idea is there's some landlord or some noble, 2001: A Space Odyssey, some landlord or some noble is unfairly taxing the people too high. So Robin Hood and his band of merry men, which are an interesting cast of characters, they go out and redistribute the wealth to try and make it a little more fair. And it's kind of a funny story, and there's maybe a love story with Maid Marian, and there's some fun sword fights to watch, and everyone gets to dress in silly costumes, and they have, what do they call it, the spring games they would play. It was almost like the Olympics or something, but in every little village they'd have like a contest, like an archery contest, and they'd throw rocks. I think they called it hurling, or something like that, and they had they had some sporting events that would accompany the Robin Hood plays. It's very interesting to think that and that's something about, stories. And this is one thing that, like, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud are right about. There's some things that I would strongly disagree with them. But the Robin Hood story very much struck a chord in England. There were a lot of legends and stories, but the story of Robin Hood and the story of King Arthur are two myths that seem to have just perpetuated for hundreds, if not thousands of years in Old English society. The legend of King Arthur and the legend of Robin Hood. They were just essential myths. And when a myth becomes that essential, when a legend or a myth becomes that essential, it's for a reason, right? I mean, obviously, there were plenty of stories that flourished and then didn't get popular. But if a legend or a myth becomes that popular, then at that point, you have to look at it and you have to say, okay, it struck a chord somehow. It served some kind of purpose. You could say that about Arthurian legend. Arthurian legend is kind of like that. It serves some kind of purpose. King Arthur, who pulls the sword from the stone. It's almost like he won the lotto to be the king, right? I guess in some versions of the story, he's he's actually the child of the king, but he's lost or something. But he goes and he pulls the sword from the stone. No one else can do it, but magically he pulls the sword. He pulls the sword from the stone. It's not Excalibur, but he pulls the sword from the stone. And magically, he's the king. Whoosh, that proves he's the king. And then the lady of the lake, right? Some woman in a pond, some magical woman in a pond, comes out of the pond and gives him his magical sword, Excalibur. And then, he builds a round table. A round table, the idea that he's introducing some kind of notion of social equality among his knights. There's some kind of notion that people are equal or something like that. A round table, and then of course his wife cheats on him. His wife has an extramarital affair with Sir Lancelot. He's getting older. And I guess, he's getting older and the marriage is getting a little stale. He's getting older and the marriage is getting a little stale. And so Sir Lancelot, who's young and sexy, seduces his wife. And Sir Lancelot was kind of King Arthur's protege, right? He was the mentor to Sir Lancelot. But yet Sir Lancelot, the mentee, overtakes the mentor. And so then there's a big civil war and it ends up destroying both of them. And King Arthur goes away and it's a tragedy. And he's just so sad that the whole kingdom has been destroyed. But then he goes away. And as he goes away, he goes away into the mists, but he shall return at some point, the legend tells us, right? He's the once and future king, right? That King Arthur shall return. It's telling us something, right? I'm going to write down these super chats now. Brzezinski, Kissinger, differences. All right. Putin on Russian Revolution. All right, and Tim Buck versus William Z. Foster. Writing them all down. And that, okay, so you can look at Robin Hood, you can look at King Arthur, you can look at these legends that we know them because we speak English in the United States, right? Because this is a largely English-speaking country. We have a largely Anglo culture in many, many ways that I could go into great detail about, right? There's people, at one point, there were people in Britain who used to joke, they used to say, the United States is more English than England is. That some of the stuff in England, that the really Victorian way of thinking about things, they kind of got over after World War II, but we kept going with it. So, we're a very Anglo culture here, at least, the old, Norman Rockwell conservative American values, right, that people think of, that conservative folks identify with, rural middle America, the values that they have that, are very, very Anglo in many, many ways. When we say cleanliness is next to godliness, there's people in Europe who walk over here and they think we're weird because we're always showering. They're like, you don't smell like a person, right? Well, we emphasize, we don't like body odor over here. Well, that's very English, except we're more into it than the English are in some ways, right? We're into deodorant. We're into everyone smelling nice all the time. And, there's other things, work ethic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all of that. We think of those as American values, but in a lot of ways, those are Victorian English values. And that's interesting to think about. And that's why we know the story of Robin Hood. That's why we know the story of King Arthur. And we don't necessarily know stories from France or Germany or stories from Africa or Asia or Latin America as much, right? Now, there's been efforts, right, to introduce the stories and legends from different cultures, right? There's been an attempt to popularize African-American folklore. There's been an attempt to popularize the legends of Native Americans. Robin Hood as archetypes. That's been something we've tried to do largely. But because we're English speaking, we know that. Now, one thing I have argued, and this has long been a feeling that I've had, is that the story that really defines the United States, I would argue even kind of the way King Arthur and Robin Hood defined in medieval Europe, one of the stories, not the only one, but one of the stories that really defines the United States of America in our time is the Superman story. The Superman comic books are very, very much pointing to the best things in the American spirit, right? Just like Robin Hood was a critic of feudalism. He wasn't straight up attacking feudalism, calling for a revolution, but he was critiquing feudalism with kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of doing so and appealing to the more progressive sentiments that people had about the injustices of their society. And I would argue that Superman really, in many, many ways, represents the best within Americans. Now, obviously, Superman can be distorted. And I would argue, I mean, the movie that they made, 5, 6 years ago now, Superman, Man of Steel, was awful. They were really, but you watch those Christopher Reeve Superman movies from the 80s, and especially if you read the original Superman comics, goodness gracious. I mean, Superman, what have I got here? I've got Superman, the Golden Age here, right? I don't own very many comic books, but I guess this makes me a nerd, right? I think I own two of these comic book compilations I do own, so I guess this makes me a nerd. And you read the Superman comic books from 1939, the year they were published. This is very left-wing stuff. Superman is supporting striking workers when their crooked boss is going to try to kill them in a mine accident. That's kind of amazing, and of course, who is he fighting? He's fighting Lex Luthor, a maniacally evil bald guy who wants to use technology not to improve the lives of working people, but to enrich himself at the expense of others. So basically, he's fighting Jeff Bezos, Lex Luthor Bezos. And Superman is against racism, and he's constantly making history of generals being tied to the presidency, right? Generals tied to presidency. He's constantly making anti-racist statements. At one point in the radio version of Superman during World War II, he's fighting the Ku Klux Klan, and they actually exposed the KKK's secrets in the radio program. It was a kind of a psyop against the Ku Klux Klan during World War II, as they exposed some of their secret codes and secret handshakes on the radio. And Superman is very much seen as the ideals of the modern era. Do you know how to say the phrase "man of steel" in Russian? Do you? Man of steel? The man of steel is Stalin. Stalin, that's what Stalin translates to, man of steel. And Superman is going around opposing racism, opposing Nazis and Ku Klux Klansmen, and he doesn't like violence. He's constantly saying how much we need to get away from war and how much he hates violence, but he only resorts to violence when he has no choice to protect the innocent. He could rule the world, right? After all, he's got those superpowers, but he doesn't rule the world. Instead, he chooses to live a humble life as mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, but when the moment arises, when someone is in need, he then runs to the nearest phone booth and changes out of his costume and changes into the Superman costume in the phone booth and then rushes out to save the day. And Superman really does appeal to some of the best within the American spirit. Anti-racism, anti-fascism, humility. He's a farmer. Do you know that? Superman is a farmer. He's from Kansas. He's from Smallville, Kansas. He's a farmer guy who's moved to the big city. It's funny because 1939 is the year the Superman comic books were published. They were published in Cleveland, Ohio, is where they were published. And the authors of Superman were two Jewish guys who were somewhat left-wing. They were Roosevelt supporters. They were pro-labor union. And it's interesting because 1939 is the year the Superman comics were published. All right, so Dan, 1939 is the year the comic books were published. 1940 is the year that Earl Browder ran for president for the second time. Right, that many degreed professionals aren't workers per se. All right. All right. Question mark. Right, 1930, 1940. 1940 is the year, World War II had already started in Europe, and Earl Browder ran for president of the United States in 1940. And Earl Browder actually, he nicknamed himself the Man from Kansas. And he had a campaign theme song called The Man from Kansas. It was the theme song of the 1940 Earl Browder presidential campaign. So the fact that, Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party, whose nickname was the Man from Kansas, and, Superman is, after all, the man of steel, and his first adventure is to protect a labor union, and he's always condemning racism and fascism, because it opposes the American way of life, right? Truth, justice, and the American way. And his enemy is an evil capitalist. I mean, Superman in 1939, many people probably thought that Superman guy is a commie. He's a commie. Now, he's not a commie like in the early 30s. He's not a third period communist. He's not, he's not leading unemployment councils, and he's not, accusing the Trotskyites of being social fascists. No. Superman's a popular front communist, right? He likes Roosevelt. He hates the Ku Klux Klan. He likes labor unions. He's anti-fascist, and he doesn't like those capitalists that are always scheming the people. Superman is a Roosevelt-era populist, very much so. And he appeals to really the values, I think, that greatest generation people talk about, what they fought for in the Second World War. Go and listen to Henry Wallace's speech during the Second World War, The Century for the Common Man, right? Henry Wallace, who was the vice president, who was kicked out of the Democratic Party for being too socialist, basically, the former Secretary of Agriculture. Henry Wallace gave this beautiful speech called Century for the Common Man. And in that speech, he lays out these values. He talks about, the great revolutions across the world in 1848 and 1776 and 1917 in Russia. And I mean, he talks of the Soviet Union as an ally. And I mean, you read the Century for the Common Man speech by Henry Wallace. It's very much it's a patriotic speech, it's a religious speech, but it's also a populist speech. It is very much against capitalism, it's against racism, it's, fighting for the common man against the ruling class, and that Superman comics very much incarnate the ideals of the popular front era. And I've argued that myths and legends and stories, I mean, people have probably seen the videos of me speaking about Superman to audiences. There's a reason to do that. The fact that people watch Superman movies, the fact that people read Superman comics, that means that those values, some of the values that you can find in Superman stories and comics, appeal to people. And they strike a chord with people. And that is what we communists have to do. We have to be finding ways that we can appeal to good values that people already have, right? We can try to give people new values. We can try to teach people things that they don't already know. We can try to change people's worldview. But at the same time, it's way easier to find the good within people that already exists, the thing that makes people like the Superman comics. Find that good within people and get them to identify it with our cause. I got to tell you, if you watch one of those Christopher Reeve Superman movies, Christopher Reeve Superman movies, you feel good. There's just something about it. It just gives you a good vibe. That good vibe, if people could feel that way about communism, we would really have a chance of seeing a socialist America. If people could identify that good vibe that they get from those Christopher Reeve movies with our politics and our movement, that would be a very, very good thing. And I will add, this is a very important point. This must be said. You know, the Weathermen, which were this crazy ultra-leftist group, during the 1960s, they were very much a new left formation. And thank you, David, for the super chat. I'll say another thing about that before I end my opening remarks. But the Weathermen, the Weather Underground, right? Before they went underground, they had a big rally in Flint, Michigan, called their Flint War Conference. And if you read what was said at this Flint War Conference of the Weather Underground, it was a satanic event, okay? It was an evil event. One thing that I find fascinating, I actually have the book around here somewhere, but there's a write-up of the Flint War Conference, and Bob Avakian went to the Flint War Conference, and I'm not a huge fan of Bob Avakian, but what Bob Avakian did at the War Conference sounded about right. He went to the War Conference, the Flint War Conference, and told the Weathermen to stop saying that average Americans were the enemy. And Bob Avakian went there, and he said at the Flint War Conference, you guys are calling average American working people the pigs, you're calling them the enemy, and by doing that, you're cutting yourself off from the broad masses of people. And he argued with the Weathermen, and they kicked him out of there. And they said that by trying to put class over race, he was revealing himself to be a privileged white man or something, and they kicked him out of there. Bob Avakian went there and argued with him. Bernadine Dorn, who was the leader of the Weather Underground organization, this woman who was the leader of it, who's now married to Bill Ayers, who was also part of the Weather Underground organization, she gave a speech supporting Charles Manson. The murders of Charles Manson had just happened. And so Bernadine Dorn gave a speech at this conference, and she said that Charles Manson was great because they killed Sharon Tate, the actress, a pregnant woman, with the very fork she was eating with. And that was so cool, dig it, and thought it was so cool, this brutal, grisly murder that Charles Manson had just committed. And so then she led the crowd, and they got four fingers, and they all started going, fork, 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 and saluting like Charles Manson. That's satanic. That's evil, right? Evil. And then at one point, I don't know which one of them it was. I think it was Jeff Jones. Jeff Jones, a leader of the Weathermen, gave a speech, and he said that the goal of the Weather Underground was to appeal to the part of every kid that loves Lex Luthor and hates Superman. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. Superman is fighting for the people. Lex Luthor is an evil capitalist trying to kill them. Superman is fighting the Ku Klux Klan and fighting racism. Lex Luthor is on the side of the Ku Klux Klan, working against Superman, scheming against the people. Why would a progressive person, why would any progressive person like Lex Luthor and hate Superman? But that's what Jeff Jones said. And apparently, at another big SDS convention, there was apparently a leader of the Black Panthers who gave a speech where he said, quote, Superman was a punk because he never tried to fuck Lois Lane. And that was a speech he gave that people thought was so edgy and cool. No, I mean, it was like they're basically saying that because Superman never tried to get Lois Lane into bed, he wasn't a real man or something. That was part of the Black Panthers and stuff. The Black Panthers I generally am sympathetic with, but that particular line is not particularly good. But it's pretty clear that the new left, they hated Superman, right? And they hated Superman because in a lot of ways they saw average middle Americans as their enemy. And just like they liked Charles Manson, and they're going fork, 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 fork. We like Charles Manson. That's demented, right? If you watch, there's a documentary about the Weather Underground organization, and Mark Rudd, who was a leader of the Weather Underground organization, he said they got into the mindset that there were no innocent Americans. at least especially among the white ones, right? That because the Americans participated in the empire, they were all complicit, they were all responsible. They made the average American people their enemy. And they got into this mindset that they were morally superior to the broad masses of people. The broad masses of people were their enemy, and they were going to somehow morally redeem themselves by engaging in ultra left adventurism, and terrorism. They were going to morally redeem themselves. That's a dangerous mindset. That is the mindset of school shooters, right? That's the mindset of people who commit suicide, or that's a doomer pilled mindset, right? That if you get into the point where you just hate everyone around you, they're all evil, but I'm the good one, and I'm going to show them. I mean, that's a dangerous mindset. And honestly, that mindset is not very different than your typical libertarian. Your typical libertarian thinks he's a genius, and the world doesn't recognize what a great genius he is. He's the motor of the world, and maybe he'll die and they'll never see his greatness. And he's Howard Rourke, and he's John Galt, and no one knows how amazing. That's your typical libertarian mindset. When in reality, a lot of them are people that might be more intelligent or more well-read than your average Joe, but they have big social problems that prevents. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen Dune, but that prevents them from connecting with other people, I would argue. And that it's a way of kind of looking past their own shortcomings, kind of covering up for their own kind of shame and frustration with their position in life by kind of hiding in this libertarian mindset. And that Maoist third worldism and the Weather Underground stuff can contribute to that. And no, we should be appealing to the goodness in people. We should be appealing to what it is that makes people like Superman, and get people to see that Superman is an anti-imperialist. Superman is an advocate for the downtrodden. Superman is a socialist. Superman's a socialist. And so can you. So can you. You can be Superman. You can be the man of steel, right? Superman originates in an era where the Soviet Union was our friends and the Nazis were our enemies. That was a much better time, right? When China and the Soviet Union and the United States all came together to fight the Nazis. That was a good moment in American history. Nowadays, the U.S. government is aligned with the Nazis in Ukraine. It's aligned with the Wahhabi, extremists in Saudi Arabia. It's aligned with all kinds of barbaric, primitive, destructive forces, and we see Russia and China as our enemy. And we go around the world trying to tear down countries that are trying to build themselves up. That's not what Superman was about. That is not what Superman would have wanted. Superman would have never stood for that. Superman would never have tolerated that. That's not Superman's values. That might be Batman's values. That's another conversation. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole tonight. I'm tired, and it's fall. I'm not really that tired, right? I've been tired all day, and now, like I told you. But anyway, the other thing I just wanted to add, did I ever meet Bill Ayers during Occupy? Well, I didn't meet him during Occupy, but I have encountered him a couple times. But anyway, I wanted to just end by, I did just run down the Weathermen a whole bunch, right? I did just tell you that I don't like the Weathermen. I did just bash their political line of hating average Americans. I did just, tear down the Weathermen a whole bunch. That said, I want to tell you, right, it looks like David Gilbert has just been granted parole. That's a good thing, And as much as I don't agree with what he did, and I vehemently disagree with what David Gilbert did, right? And this is his book, Love and Struggle. I vehemently disagree with what he did. And he hated average Americans. He was an ultra-left adventurist. I don't know exactly, what he specifically did, if he's guilty of exactly, but regardless, I'm glad that he's been freed. And the same goes for... what is his name? Maroon, right? Maroon has also been granted compassionate release, a Black Liberation Army fighter. And look, folks, at this point, there needs to be a blanket amnesty for all political prisoners. Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, they need to let them all go. That's what they need to do. Let them all go. Not because we approve as a society of what they did. Not because, I think Mumia Abu-Jamal is innocent, first of all. I think Leonard Peltier is also innocent. David Gilbert, no comment. Maroon, I don't know the details of his case, but, even the ones that aren't innocent, they should be freed. And the reason that they should be freed, and all of them, right? I mean, all of them, they should be freed. And the reason they should be freed is because of the fact that during that time period, the U.S. government murdered many Black Panthers. The U.S. government killed and murdered many Puerto Rican freedom fighters. There were 4 students at Kent State University that were gunned down in cold blood at a peaceful anti-war rally at Kent State University. There were other instances. Jackson State, the police opened fire on a civil rights and anti-war protest and killed 2 students, just shot them at Jackson State University in Mississippi. The COINTELPRO. The COINTELPRO. No one ever went to jail for COINTELPRO. J. Edgar Hoover never went to prison. I'm sorry, but, in order to have real reconciliation, in order to make clear to the Black community that we recognize that what they were demanding and fighting for in the 60s, and even today as part of Black Lives Matter, is justified, we need to release those prisoners. Every former Black Liberation Army fighter should be freed. All of the Move 9 should be freed. All of, Jamil Al-Amin should be freed, also known as H. Rap Brown, should be freed. All of them should be freed. We need a blanket amnesty for all political prisoners of the 1960s, right? When they signed the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, they released a lot of IRA people, right? And that was part of reconciliation. And in order to have reconciliation, they should free all political prisoners. And you know what? I would even say in Peru that they should do that for Sendero Luminoso, right? Gonzalo is dead at this point. They should free all the Shining Path people. Let them out, right? In order to heal the country from the horrors of what went on, with the Shining Path, they should release them, right? Everybody knows that the Fujimori government did horrendous things, during that war. And so they should free all of the Shining Path people, and they should free all the political prisoners in the United States, in order to heal the country. And the thing is, you have to admit that maybe the tactics that some of these people used, like, Comrade Maroon, is that what he was called? Maroon Schultz, he was released, and David Gilbert, and obviously some of the tactics that they endure. We would never endorse what they did, right? We don't advocate people engaging in isolated acts of left adventurous terrorism. We want a peaceful transition to socialism through the democratic process. We have our doubts about whether the capitalists will allow that, but we don't advocate, we don't advocate violence. We advocate a peaceful transition. However, we can recognize that these people, they were met with horrendous violence as well. They were met with horrendous violence, and that the Weather Underground, the May 19th Communist Organization, the Symbionese Liberation Army, they were violent, and the FBI was violent, and the CIA was violent, and the police around the country were violent, and the National Guard was violent when it went into the Detroit, and the Philadelphia police were violent when they firebombed the Move House, and burned the Move organization members alive. And so, as a way of reconciliation, they should have a blanket amnesty for all political prisoners. And if I were elected president, right, I'm not a politician, but if I were elected president, that's one thing I would do. I would give an amnesty, a blanket amnesty, to all political prisoners. Why does the U.S. have such a hazy definition of who counts as a political prisoner concerning its own prisoners? Right? All right. U.S. definition of political prisoner. So that's what I would do. That said, also, Julian Assange needs to be released. They need to release Julian Assange. They need to release Julian Assange. They need to release him, right? He's a journalist. He's a publisher. He's not himself a whistleblower. He is not somebody who is obligated to not release classified information. He only published things that other people gave him. And if you put Julian Assange in prison, at that point, you just destroyed freedom of speech. and freedom of the press. Julian Assange, was somebody who published information that other people gave him, right? And that is not a crime. It is not a crime. It is called freedom of the press. And if you create a situation where someone can be jailed for publishing information, at that point, you are opening the door. You are opening the door to basically the government having to approve every newspaper that ever gets published and every broadcast that comes out. Because if they can arrest you for publishing something that was classified and you didn't know it was classified, at that point, you're going to have to ask their permission to publish anything. And then at that point, freedom of the press is over. The fact that mainstream U.S. media is not supporting him reveals that they aren't really, they aren't really advocates of free speech. They aren't really advocates of freedom of the press, right? CNN is not worried about what's happening to Julian Assange because they put out the U.S. government, State Department propaganda line. So they don't care. MSNBC doesn't care about Julian Assange because they're not going to publish anything that goes against the mainstream media line anyway. But all honest voices are speaking up for Julian Assange right now. Because if you look at what's going on, it is very, very, very dangerous. It is extremely dangerous what they're doing to Julian Assange. It could end journalism as we know it. It could end freedom of the press. All he did was publish information that other people gave him. And that is not a crime. That is not a crime. That is not a crime. And they need to let him out. Yes, I did see the coverage. I've seen it. He does good stuff. I like Mr. Medhurst. Richard Medhurst does great stuff. I'd love to chat with him anytime. Big fan of his. It's not a crime to publish information that other people gave him. They need to free Julian Assange. And that's the cutting edge. Tulsi Gabbard has spoken up for Julian Assange. At this point, Jeremy Corbyn has spoken up for Julian Assange. And the people who won't speak up for Julian Assange, Bernie Sanders won't speak up for Julian Assange. Well, that's disappointing, isn't it? The fact that Sarah Palin will speak up for Julian Assange and Bernie Sanders won't, that is really telling you something there, isn't it? And Julian Assange is one of those issues that cuts like a knife. If you're for the establishment, you speak up. You don't speak up for Julian Assange. If you're against the establishment, you speak up for Julian Assange. That's how it works. And you'll notice the people that speak against Julian Assange are people that are now marginalized, and the people that don't speak up for Julian Assange are the ones that are given mainstream play. And you'll notice that when Sarah Palin was given mainstream play, she hated Julian Assange. And now that she's not getting mainstream play, she supports him. And I'm just telling you, folks, I am just telling you, we keep seeing issues like this. Force the vote was another great, Jimmy Dore, force the vote was like a knife. Shink, right? It separates the sheep from the goats, so to speak. And, we're seeing issues like this. Increasingly, there are issues where, it doesn't matter if you call yourself a socialist. It doesn't matter if you call yourself a communist. It doesn't matter if you call yourself an anti-racist. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. That's not the hostile camp. It's not an ideological divide in our society at this point. It's not an ideological divide in our society. There is an apparatus that rules our society, and there are people challenging it internationally and domestically. And there are people supporting it. And Julian Assange is a litmus test. If you support freeing Julian Assange, you are not part of the ruling apparatus of our society. If you support jailing Julian Assange, you are. And, and there's going to be more issues like this. There's going to be more issues like this where a knife that just cuts through, separates the left, the right, the men from the boys, the women from the girls, the sheep from the goats, the Kurds from the Way. I shouldn't say that because Kurd is like an ethnicity. Didn't think of that. I apologize if there's any Kurds watching. Didn't mean you. I meant, never mind. Anyway, but yeah, increasingly we're going to see issues like that. So there you go, folks. Those are my opening remarks for tonight. Keep the super chats rolling in. names and locations. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you, and then we'll get into our second half of our show. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Raphael in Brazil. Welcome, Raphael. Welcome, welcome. All right. Who else? Who else? Whoa. All right. Hold. All right. Don't hold on. Just keep them coming. But I have to go up because I have to get y'all. All right. Finn in Duluth, Minnesota. Nassau in Nassau County, Char Darling. Montreal. Chaya in Montreal. Good friend. Micah in Las Vegas, Zachary in Richmond, Virginia, JT24 or Kinky in Joshua Tree, California. Shout out to you, Kinky. President Jesus in Los Angeles, Elias from Wisconsin, Arturo from Alaska, Jeff in Nicaragua. Shout out to you, Jeff. San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, Knoxville, Tennessee, Gerard in Idaho, Otto in Cali, Ben in Denver, Troy, New York, JR in Kalamazoo, Seattle, Kevin in Oakland, Springfield, Missouri, Io Hillary in New York City, Cincinnati, Ohio, Indonesia, Patrick from Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Paragas from Los Angeles, Ramsey in Cincinnati, Ohio, Ben in Chicago. You should connect with the Chicago folks at the Center for Political Innovation. We got a great group of folks there in Chicago. I think there's Dana in Chicago. There's Eric in Chicago, Eric and Fox, and they're doing great stuff. If you're in the Chicago area, you should connect. John McCarthy in Chicago, Mo in Toronto, Canada, Grant from Duluth, Oahu, Hawaii, says Kurt. Very good. New Mexico, Elatos Asados. All right. Detroit, Michigan. Liam in Scotland. Zach in rainy Seattle. The Apartments of Justice. I don't know where that is, but there you go. All right. I think I'd like to live in the Apartments of Justice. Right. But there you go. Hiawatha City, Arizona. Oregon. Right. David Rennie in Hamilton, Ontario, Steve in rainy Seattle, Prester John in Jamaica. Shout out to you. I don't think we've had a viewer in Jamaica before. That's pretty cool. Cleveland Pirate Alex, Diego, Colombia. Very good. Welcome, Diego. Mindanao to Midwest, Olympia Logic, always a beloved member of this community. Oslo, Red, Norway. Oslo. There you go. Central Jersey, Mike in North Carolina, Mohsen from Iran. Behind my laptop screen. Well, I thought you'd be inside your laptop screen, Mr. Pianist, but there you go. You're behind it. Thank goodness. Mike in Arcata, Canada. Paris of the Plains. Jordan in Washington. Montgomery, Alabama. Dan in Fremont, California. Isaiah in Texas. Shout out to you, Isaiah. Michigan. Daha in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Oh, I'm in Brooklyn too. We're in the same borough, aren't we? There you go. ATX, which stands for Austin, Texas. When you're in Texas, look behind you, because that's where the Rangers are going to be. I apologize, Texas people. I just can't stop. I remember this silly Chuck Norris show from when I was a kid, and just how hokey the theme song of it was. And so I just, every so often, I think of that. But anyway, Hawaii, I'm sure you're sick of it, Texas people. You deserve better than that. I have an uncle in Texas. He's got two good kids who are grown up now, just me. And, I went down, I think it was in Harlingen, Texas. I visited them when I was a teenager. We spent some time. We even walked over the border into Mexico a couple times. So there you go. Queens, New York City. I wish you'd come back to Union Square. Oh, I'm around that area all the time, Al. I'm around Union Square. I'm around. If you hang around Union Square one of these days, you'll see me, right? It's kind of like what they used to tell people about if you want to see a moose. If you want to see a moose, you go down by the water, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And eventually the moose will come and drink from the river, right? Because he has to drink something. So Union Square, if you want to see me, you just have to go down by Union Square and just wait and wait and wait, and eventually I will be there. I never stray too far from Union Square. But there you go. Oak Grove, Kentucky, Halliburton, Canada, Banjo, Mankato, Minnesota, Enoch, Australia, Yucatan, St. David's, Bermuda, Carter in Duluth, Calgary, Canada, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, Alex Gunn in Boulder. There you go. Aziz in Sydney, Australia, Mason from Austin, Texas. Wow, wow. All hail West Texas. So there you go, right? Right? You don't even want to know the name of a food truck I found that exists in Austin, Texas. No, I do not want to know the name of that food truck. I don't want to know. There are some things I do want to know, and that is not one of them. Zachary Brunch says Walker, Texas Ranger. So there you go. There you go. Good stuff. Indiana, Tony Garia, Piney Woods, Mississippi. Kieran from San Diego. Kinky says she has Texophobia. Oh, dear. But there you go. Wow. Have we had a camp under a bush in Union Square, says Kinky. Exactly. Ash in Chicago. Have we ever had a roll call that goes on this long? This is great. I love you all. This is great. So many people are giving their names and locations. How many lurkers? This is like their first time. They're brave enough to tell me their names and locations. Wow. We got Chairman Meow in Arizona. We've got Nate in Chicago. Man, we've got a big audience in Chicago, don't we? Orestes in Florida. Yeah, Finn says this is a long-ass roll call, and it really, really is. But there you go. All right, now I'm going to start answering super chats. So keep the super chats rolling in. The more you super chat. Dario from Brooklyn, right? Peter from Gisborne, Australia, right? That's one of those Robin Hood names, right? Guy of Gisborne, isn't he a figure in Robin Hood? Tuning in from Baltimore, says Benjamin. Wow, so many great people here. So many great people. All right, I'm going to start answering super chats. All right. I think I already answered the Robin Hood thing. 2001, A Space Odyssey. I watched that movie when I was in high school, and I had absolutely no idea what was going on, right? It starts out, there's a bunch of monkeys, and they're just dancing around, and one monkey takes a bone and he starts banging on a skull with his bone, and then they're all jumping up and down, and then all of a sudden this space thing comes down, this like obelisk comes down from space, and then fast forward, this guy's saying goodbye to his daughter on this like video chat thing. He's saying goodbye to his daughter because he's going on a trip. And then they're in space, and they're on this ship with no gravity, and it like makes you like dizzy because there's no gravity on the ship because you can't tell where up and down are. Planet of the Apes. You can't tell where up and down are. And then the evil computer takes over the ship. I'm sorry, Dave. I just can't do that. And then finally they get where they're going, and the guy gets to wherever they're going, and then there's this big psychedelic color show, and then he turns into a baby, and then the movie ends. And I was just like, what in the hell was going on? So then I went and I read the book. And the book makes a lot of sense, actually. If you read the book, the movie makes sense, right? It's Arthur C. Clarke. It's a science fiction apocalypse story, and it's about how as much as human beings, Dave, what are you doing, Dave, says Red Precarian. It's about how as much as human beings have advanced, they still maintain their self-destructive impulse. And actually, the final scene in the book, from what I remember, is that the baby, the person is reborn, right? The human who goes into the spaceship or whatever, he's reborn, and he's like an infant, but he has like godlike powers. And he's looking at the Earth, and he sees nuclear weapons circling the Earth. Facebook changing its name to Meta. And he sees nuclear weapons circling the Earth, and he's able to make them vanish, right? But it's about basically that human beings, they've gone so far, they've gotten into space, but they're still kind of slaves to the machines, right? And the machine kind of takes over, and that's really what it's about, right? And it's a classic work of science fiction. It's a very important science fiction work. It's some of that science fiction that's important. It's condemning nuclear war, the danger of nuclear war, the fallibility of human beings. technological progress. That's what the monkeys are at the beginning, right? When the monkey is banging his stick, that's human, that's, it's before human evolution or whatever. Some pre-human creature has discovered how to make a tool. As human beings being tool makers, and so that's the sign from the aliens that they can send their obelisk down or whatever. I don't remember very much about the book, but I remember that part. So there you go, 2001, A Space Odyssey. All right. Brzezinski and Kissinger, what were the differences? Well, Zbigniew Brzezinski, his family was from Poland. I believe he spent a lot of his youth in Canada, but eventually came to the United States during the 50s. His family were Roman Catholic Poles who hated the Russians ethnically, anti-communists, and they fled when the communists took power in Poland. Anti-communists, anti-Russian on kind of an ethnic level. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was very much a Roman Catholic, very, very loyal to the Roman Catholic Church, not very pro-Israel. He really viewed Israel with suspicion. He viewed Israel as kind of a detriment to achieving U.S. foreign policy, and he spent most of his career going around finding various anti-Semites who would be allies of the United States. The Mujahideen of Afghanistan. Do you think they were big fans of Jewish people? What about the various neo-fascists across Eastern Europe who were anti-Soviet, who thought that, Hitler was right in World War II? Do you think they were big fans of Jews? Of course not. And Brzezinski, he didn't like Israel. Now, he wasn't going around giving anti-Israel speeches and all of that, but when Obama was attacked for having someone on his staff who had endorsed the Mearsheimer and Walt book. The John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt wrote a book called The Israel Lobby. It was in the final years of Bush. And then Obama had someone, God forbid, Obama had somebody in his campaign who had said something good about that book, and the media went crazy with it. Apparently, Brzezinski got on the phone with Barack Obama and advised him about how to handle being criticized by, pro-Israel forces. And Brzezinski kind of, even though he was not, again, he wasn't publicly going around condemning Israel, but he was not a fan of Israel, and he was going around the world kind of finding fascists in Eastern Europe, finding, Wahhabis and, fanatical Wahhabi extremists in Saudi Arabia and other places. He was going around kind of cultivating relationships between the U.S. government and extremist forces that were useful proxies, counter gangs, to fight the Soviet Union. And he was really into, what is it? They called it strategic disengagement. He didn't want the arms race to escalate. Instead, he wanted to, he wanted to find the contradictions of Soviet society, the contradictions between the Soviets and their allies, and manipulate those differences. That was what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to, he wasn't focused on, let's just, have a lot of money be spent on the arms race. Let's try to manipulate Poland and the Soviet Union against each other, manipulate Hungary and the Soviet Union against each other, play different factions in the Soviet Communist Party against each other. That was his thing. He was playing a long chess game against the Soviets, and the idea of, an arms race was a detriment to his strategy. That's Brzezinski. Now, Henry Kissinger. His father, from what I understand, was actually a figure within the Bavarian Soviet Republic. I don't know if you know this, but Bavaria, at one point in 1919, I think, after World War I, Bavaria in Germany seceded from the rest of Germany and declared itself to be temporarily, for a couple months, the Bavarian Soviet Republic. And Henry Kissinger's father was a figure in the Bavarian Soviet Republic temporarily. And Henry Kissinger, he was a different person. Now, the reason there was an intense rivalry between Kissinger and Brzezinski. And the rivalry was not really about ideology. It was that basically they were both trying to do the same thing, right? They were both strategists of the United States against communism and against the Soviet Union, really. And they were both these big brain strategists. That was kind of how they were portrayed. And they were both Rockefeller creations. Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski both were very much products of the Rockefeller family, right? The wealthy oil banking dynasty of New York origins, the Rockefellers, the Standard Oil heirs, right? ExxonMobil is their is the current incarnation of their empire. It's up there with Chase Bank and one of the richest families in the history of the United States. No one knows how much money they have. They have. It's like impossible to calculate. That's what this book you can read, right? If you want to know about the Rockefellers, and they're liberals, so to speak, right? The Rockefeller syndrome. This is a very, very good book about the Rockefeller family. It's written by Ferdinand Lundberg, right? Rockefeller Syndrome, it's called. It talks about the Rockefellers are liberal, kind of liberal, kind of liberal. They're not far right wing, but they're definitely not socialists or anything like that. They're kind of liberal Eastern establishment folks. They're into the Council on Foreign Relations. They're into hiring strategists. They're into funding think tanks and foundations to cultivate people that will manage the empire effectively. And Kissinger and Brzezinski were both from that school. And there was like a rivalry between them, but it was largely because they were competing for the same money and they were doing roughly the same job, trying to prove they were the big brains of empire. And they were doing it at roughly the same time, you have to remember, right? And, both of them kind of came into ascendancy as the United States had lost in Vietnam. Now, Kissinger was in there with Nixon as they were losing Vietnam, whereas, Brzezinski was on the outside during those years. He wasn't in the White House, but he wasn't in the White House, but he was coming into political ascendancy during those years. And then it was really during the Carter administration that Brzezinski really shined. But Kissinger and Brzezinski, they both had the same job. They both were on the Trilateral Commission, right? That was them. The Trilateral Commission was them. It was both of them. They were just strategists. The USA lost. In the 70s was kind of a volatile time for the United States because McCarthyism and 1950s America had broken, all right? We were not the country we were coming out of the Second World War. There was not the level of conformity there once had been. There was not the kind of cultural uniformity there once had been. The civil rights question had exploded. The military no longer had the support that it once had. There was a lot of confusion in U.S. society. So the USA wasn't what it was during the early Cold War. The early Cold War had broken, and the late Cold War was still being figured out, right? They were figuring out the late Cold War. And really, by the time Reagan became president, the late Cold War had set in, and they had figured out the neocon political model very effectively. It started with Nixon, but they were still tinkering with it, right? And the 70s, when Brzezinski and Kissinger were prominent, they were trying to figure out the late Cold War model, the neocon model for U.S. politics. They hadn't figured it out yet, so they were tinkering around, and Kissinger and Brzezinski were part of that tinkering. Brzezinski is associated with the liberals, but Reagan gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was just an anti-communist. He didn't really care. But he was a little bit more of a liberal. He didn't seem to like the arms race, and a lot of people don't realize this, but one of the things that Brzezinski did, and this is very bizarre, right? And again, they talk about this in his biography, which I've read, and in his biography, and it's one thing that they don't talk about very much, but, Brzezinski was this big intellectual who was an anti-communist or whatever, Columbia University, International Studies, Center for Communist Studies, Cold War University. It's Joel Brown, keep up the good work. Thoughts on high gas prices around the country. All right, high gas prices. The thing about Brzezinski was that and this is something no one talks about. But during the Vietnam War, there were different groups protesting the Vietnam War, obviously, right? There were many different groups protesting the Vietnam War. Um, One of the groups that protested the Vietnam War was a group of academics. It was a group of academics and, like prominent college professors and clergy, like prominent religious figures, some like Democrat politicians. And they wouldn't even say they were fully against the war. They were what's it called? They called for negotiations. They were called Negotiate Now. And they were an organization. It was called Negotiate Now. And the Communist Party USA put all of its resources, or not all of it, but a lot of its resources and energy into supporting Negotiate Now because it had so many of all the anti-war groups in the early part of the anti-Vietnam War movement, it had the most support. It was the most well-connected. It was called Negotiate Now. And, it was, college professors, clergy, low-level members of Congress, Negotiate Now. They weren't against the war. They were just for negotiate. Well, the president, the spokesperson for Negotiate Now, was Zbigniew Brzezinski. And you wouldn't know that, right? I mean, he was supposed to be this big anti-communist, but he was the leader of this anti-war, this very, very moderate kind of anti-war group that the Communist Party USA was supporting. And why? Because Brzezinski was from that soft power school that said the best way to fight the communists is with manipulation and all of that, and that escalating the war in Vietnam and sending in more troops was not going to help the United States, and that was his attitude. So Negotiate Now was this very, very liberal group of people, and Brzezinski was the leader of it. And when I read that, I thought that was interesting. And they don't point out in his biography that the Communist Party USA was supporting Negotiate Now also, but it makes sense. It makes sense, right? That soft power wing that didn't want to directly escalate, like direct military confrontations, the Soviet Union always kind of favored that soft power wing. They thought that soft power wing of American politics, the Eastern establishment, that didn't want to directly attack them, that didn't want to escalate the arms race, the Soviet Union, for a long time, up until their demise, really thought that wing was better. And they were wrong. That's the wing that destroyed them. It wasn't Ronald Reagan escalating the arms race that destroyed the Soviet Union. It was very much, that soft power wing of American apparatus that duped and manipulated the Soviet Union. And in a lot of ways, Ronald Reagan was less of a threat to the Soviet Union than those people were. Ronald Reagan wanted to escalate the arms race. But that caused the Soviet Union to say, look, we're under attack, rally around the flag, build more weapons, defend themselves. But the synthetic left and Gorbachev, they went over there and they confused people about the nature of the United States. They created the impression that the United States wasn't as deadly as it was. They introduced the synthetic left mindset, and that the fall of the Soviet Union, the color revolutions of Eastern Europe, that was all the CIA. That was all the Brzezinski, soft power, George Soros. That was all them, right? And if Reagan had just escalated the arms race, it wouldn't have toppled the Soviet Union. It took an ideological, covert manipulation to bring down the Soviet Union, and that came from the liberals. And that's something that a lot of people from that era want to get mad about, but the anti-nuclear power movement, the hippie counterculture, the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, MK Ultra, it's that stuff that brought down the Soviet Union. The CIA brought down the Soviet Union by ideologically confusing the Soviet Communist Party, by giving the impression that if the Soviet Union dissolved, that Russia and the surrounding countries would be allowed to turn into, into social democratic welfare states. They could just become like Norway or Sweden, which that didn't happen. By giving the impression that the United States wasn't their enemy, that the United States was this land, this happy, happy, fun land of Beatles music and blue jeans, and where everyone's free and makes art all the time, and we're all a bunch of hippies over here just enjoying a good life. The CIA knew very, 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 very well how to manipulate, and it was that manipulation. The defeat of the Soviet Union was a political defeat. It wasn't a military defeat. If the Soviet Union had just been attacked by the United States, they would have been able to repel the attack and defend themselves. The Soviet Union was ideologically destroyed because the synthetic left penetrated the Soviet Union. And the synthetic left brought over, they brought over the counterculture stuff. They created the illusion that the young people protesting the Soviet government and the hippies of the United States had the same vision. They were just about freedom, man. It's a global movement for freedom. You know, we march here against nuclear power, and we're marching in Tiananmen against the Chinese communists. It's just a global movement for freedom. It's not communist. It's not anti-communist, brother. That was the stuff that brought down the Soviet Union. The synthetic left, the anti-communist left, the left that favors chaos and abstract art and drugs and deconstruction, that ultimately created a situation where the Gorbachev wing of the Soviet Communist Party could throw in the towel. And that's why, and anyway, that's what I take from Brzezinski and from a lot of that. And that's why I'm writing this book on the synthetic left, which I'm only able to write once, so I can't just put it out. I have to make sure it's really good before I publish it, because you're only allowed to write this kind of thing once, right? I'm not going to be able to write synthetic left 2, right? So I have to make sure it's really good. But yeah, so there you go. All right. Putin on the Russian Revolution. Putin on the Russian Revolution. Well, here's the thing, Io. You have to remember that, okay, so the immediate impact of the Russian Revolution was very negative, right? After the Tsar was overthrown, the Bolsheviks took power, and then the Soviet Union was invaded by 15 different countries. It was barricaded. You had the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where they signed away a lot of territory, was signed away, right? I mean, Poland, got a lot of territory, and the Soviet Union, Russia lost a lot of territory at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And in a lot of ways, the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution was devastating. I mean, a lot of people died and all of that. Things didn't get better. Things didn't start to improve for the population in Russia until about 1928, right? Until the 5-year plans of Stalin started, when they started industrializing, then life got better. But the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution was devastating. And that is why, still to this day, Lenin is not very popular in Russia. The only people who like Lenin are communists, okay? Stalin is very popular in Russia. All kinds of people in Russia like Stalin. Lenin, not so much. Lenin is associated with kind of a dark period. The other thing is that that Lenin was very much into the idea of cultivating the languages and the cultures of national minorities. He wanted to make sure that Moldovans, had Moldovan language, and Ukrainians, and he went around basically promoting national minorities. That was a big part of Bolshevism, was supportive oppressed nations. And Putin has said on many occasions that he feels that the promotion of national minorities by Lenin hurt Soviet society because it emphasized the differences rather than the sameness, right? And that Lenin was going around emphasizing the national differences among the population in a way that emphasized those differences and allowed the enemies of the Soviet Union to play those differences against each other. And that there is a lot of there's been conflict in Chechnya. There's been, there's conflict, with Muslims and such, and that a lot of the problems they have in Russia now are related to these national differences, and that Putin personally blames Lenin for that. Now, I'm not sure Putin is right about that. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, right? But, but that is his feeling, and he's emphasized that many times, and it makes sense, right? From a standpoint, you have to understand Putin is not a communist. He's not a communist. And so if he's coming at things with, my job is to make Russia a great country, my job is to make Russia a powerful country, my job is to improve the life in Russia, and you throw ideology out of it, right? He's not trying to achieve communism. He's not coming at things from a worldview. He would see Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution as an event that didn't necessarily have very good results, right? It created this, he sees it as creating national strife. He sees it as creating national strife on the one hand. He also sees it as resulting in lost territory and 15 countries invaded. And from what I've read, that is the thing. And that is why, from kind of the perspective of not being a communist, but just kind of seeing, what is good for Russian society, he sees some, he sees a lot of, the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution and some of the ideological results of the Russian Revolution, emphasizing national differences as having created problems. That's my understanding of what he says. Now, I don't know, I may be misrepresenting that. Of course, I'm only seeing things that I've seen translations of in English. I don't speak a word of Russian, but that is my, that is my understanding of what Putin has said. So I hope that that is helpful. There you go. All right, next question. Next question. All right. Tim Buck versus William Z. Foster. I don't know that much about Tim Buck. Tim Buck was leader of the Communist Party of Canada. There's some great video of him that I posted because I wanted it to be preserved. It wasn't on YouTube, so I made a point of putting it on YouTube because I wanted it to be preserved. Tim Buck was leader of the Communist Party of Canada. I don't know what that. I don't know what that means, Red. Tim Buck was the leader of the Communist Party of Canada for many years. He was like the William Z. Foster of Canada. And he was, kind of the iconic figure of Canadian communism. I have a couple of his books somewhere. I have Lenin and Canada by Tim Buck somewhere. Where do I have it? Lenin and Canada? Is this? Yes, here I have Lenin and Canada by Tim Buck. Lenin and Canada by Tim Buck. He was just he's kind of a charming, friendly fellow who was the face of communism in Canada, of the Canadian Communist Party during the years of its strength. And he was a labor union organizer. He fought for working people. And that's Tim Buck. William Z. Foster, William Z. Foster had been the leader of the National Steel Strike, became the face of American communism. So I don't know enough about Tim Buck to go into straight up comparing their personalities. Honestly, I know some about Tim Buck. I just told you what I know about Tim Buck. The most important thing to remember about Tim Buck is that when he was on his deathbed, many people wondered if he would appoint a successor to lead the Communist Party of Canada after he died. Everyone was wondering who would become Timbuktu. Sorry, that's a joke. That didn't actually happen. It's just a punchline. Timbuktu. Anyway, next question. Robin Hood as archetypes. Well, right, Robin Hood is the archetype of a social bandit, right? A social bandit. Right, so, right, I think, what is it, Woody Guthrie, he has the song, Let Me Tell You, right, what is it? Won't you gather round, my children, a story I will tell about Pretty Boy Floyd, an outlaw. Oklahoma knew him well, right? And that's an archetype, the social bandit, right? The bandit, the robber, who becomes a hero to the working people, right? That's an archetype, and Robin Hood is like the original social bandit. He's the original. I mean, and he became like a part of feudal culture in medieval Europe. I mean, he was included and embedded into the May 1st celebrations, the spring games that they would play, etc. So you can see that, right? What I think is fascinating is Kim Il Sung, the leader of North Korea, the founder of North Korea. His name literally, it's not the birth name of Kim Il Sung. That was not his birth name. It literally means Kim becomes the sun, the S-U-N. Kim becomes the sun. That's what it means. And that was not his birth name, but that was the name of a very famous social bandit in Korean history. There was some social bandit in Korea, who had, a name like, Pretty Boy Floyd, or, the Sundance Kid, or, and so Kim Il Sung named himself after a social bandit. I think that's pretty interesting, and that's an aspect of the Korean, communists that you wouldn't realize, right? That Kim Il Sung is actually named after a social bandit, and that social bandits are a thing. We don't see them as much anymore. Probably the closest thing that I've ever seen in my life to a social bandit was Chris Dorner. Do folks remember Chris Dorner? Do you remember the Chris Dorner killings? What year was that? That was, 2013, 2012. Christopher Dorner was a police officer in Los Angeles. And he was a police officer in Los Angeles who I guess he had turned in some other police officers for abusing a prisoner or something like that, and they had fired him wrongfully from being a police officer, and so Chris Dorner went on a killing spree, retaliating against other police officers. He was a cop who lost it and started killing other police officers. I mean, obviously, I'm not endorsing that. That's not good activity, okay? I'm not advocating that. But what was weird is that Chris Dorner became a folk hero. And that's what was like Facebook took down hundreds of Facebook groups honoring Chris Dorner. And Chris Dorner, it was a weird, weird moment where it was like all over the internet because Black Lives Matter was kind of a thing. It wasn't fully a thing yet, but there was still starting to be, okay, I see that red. There was, starting to be, it was starting to be. There was such anger at the police among the black community. There was such anger at the police, and there was such a feeling that society wasn't listening, that all over the internet, people were supporting Chris Dorner. People were cheering for Christopher Dorner. It was kind of a weird situation that because he was killing police officers, other police officers, and because it was in response to alleged police brutality, he had, I guess the story is he had reported some police brutality that other officers were doing, and they fired him rather than dealing with it. There was a huge outpouring of support for Chris Dorner. Now, obviously, we on here, we don't advocate any illegal activity. We don't have any admiration for what he did. We advocate a peaceful transition, etc. But it was a weird moment. And that's probably the closest thing to Pretty Boy Floyd, Robin Hood stuff that we've ever seen, where there's somebody who's an outlaw. Chris Dorner was definitely an outlaw, that people were, all over the internet, people were kind of supporting him. And that was a weird moment. What I will say is that they have shown that throughout U.S. history, a lot of social bandits are projection. And Chris Dorner too. I mean, the guy was clearly a psychopath. I mean, you're killing why are you killing the family members, right? I mean, it's like, okay, he's alleging these cops did brutality. Well, he shouldn't be, taking justice into his own hands that way either. But what did the daughters do? I mean, it's like, it's really, the more you look into the case, you can't admire Chris Dorner. He was a pretty sick dude. But people projected onto him. They wanted him to be a hero. You know what I'm saying? And in a lot of cases, that is what social bandits are. For example, Jesse James was not a hero in any conceivable way. Jesse James was scum. He was garbage. Jesse James deserved to be shot. Right? They should have given a medal to that dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard. They should have given him a medal. Jesse James, would you debate at Politicon? Yes, I would. But they should have given a medal to Mr. Howard for shooting Jesse James. Because Jesse James, and my ancestors rode with Jesse James, so I have the right to say that. If anyone has the right to say that, you can type into Google right now, Maupin Brothers Jesse James. I am descended on my father's side of the family from people who rode with Jesse James in his gang. So I have the right to say this. Jesse James was garbage. He was a Confederate. He was in favor of slavery, and he was engaged in an armed insurgency in Missouri against the Union Army. And when the Confederates lost, he then started engaging in violence and targeting banks and railroads, not because he was an anti-capitalist, but because they were associated with the North. And he made a point in some of his robberies of wearing the hood of the Ku Klux Klan in order to make a political statement. And on top of that, they weren't really robberies. They were kind of staged. He would shoot his gun off in the air a couple times and make a speech about racism and about how the North were ruining everything and black people were out of control or something, and then he would go and take the money. It was symbolic. The Missouri state legislature passed resolutions supporting Jesse James. Okay, you're not a revolutionary if the state legislature passes a resolution honoring you as you're committing your crimes, okay? I really don't think that, when Fidel Castro was trying to overthrow Batista's state legislature, passed a resolution. I mean, give me a break. Jesse James was a racist. He was a murderer. He was an advocate of the Confederacy. He was an awful person. But because of the fact that he was fighting, he was robbing railroads and banks, and because of the fact that there is kind of a gut level, just a gut level, anti-establishment feeling, Hollywood made Jesse James into a social bandit, right? If you watch Hollywood movies, you would think Jesse James was Robin Hood. He robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor. Even Woody Guthrie. I love Woody Guthrie, but he even has he recorded one of those songs, right? Jesse had a wife who mourned for his life. No children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward who shot at Mr. Howard, he laid poor Jesse in his grave. I mean, and it's like Woody Guthrie sang about Jesse James as if Jesse James was a hero, right? Well, he wasn't. He wasn't a hero, right? But it's like people wanted to see that. And in many cases, you can see that, in the 1930s, there was Machine Gun Kelly was this bank robber who had a machine gun, and that, and that there were a lot of cases where the bank robber was not actually doing anything good. The bank robber was just self-interested. He was just some guy who was robbing banks so he could make money or whatever. But the culture, they wanted him to be a hero. They wanted a social bandit. And with Pretty Boy Floyd, right? That was a 1930s criminal. All of the, good stuff Pretty Boy Floyd is alleged to have done, there's no proof he actually did it, right? People did nice things for other people. And so it would be like, somebody would, get free food from somebody, and they'd say, oh, this must have come from Pretty Boy Floyd. Well, you don't know that it came from him, right? And then in a lot of cases, and this is what's different, the broad masses of people, this is what you need to understand, right? This is important. This is really important because this is a big difference between internet communists and average people. Average people want a hero. Average people want someone to be good. They want to find a popular figure, a political leader, they want to find somebody good to follow. The broad masses, they want a good person that they can follow. Whereas internet communists want the opposite. Internet communists want to find what's wrong with everyone. They don't want there to be anyone good, right? When AOC got elected, the broad masses of people want AOC to be good. And I'll tell you, I went to town halls. I've been to town halls where AOC is. And, they want her to be good. And they might not agree with her politics. They might not even understand her politics. But they want there to be a person in Congress who's good. Right? Just so happens AOC isn't. But that's the right attitude, right? And that, the broad masses of people, they're not sitting there going, everyone's a fun. No, that's cynical people on the internet. The broad masses of people, they want things to actually change. They're not concerned about achieving the right kind of communism with the right number of workers' councils and all of that. They want things to actually change. And in order for things to actually change, there needs to be somebody in the establishment who will do it. And so they want Obama to be good. They want AOC to be good. They want somebody to be good. And that's what this projection, right? That's why there was projection that Jesse James was good. He wasn't good, but they wanted somebody to be good. That's why there was projection onto Pretty Boy Floyd, right? They wanted Pretty Boy Floyd to be good, right? And it's like people want there to be a good guy in the movie. Right? And it's they don't want to be in that place where everyone's a bad guy. They don't like that place. They want there to be a good guy in the movie. And so the broad masses are looking for a hero. They're looking for a good guy. They're looking for someone that they can support. People on the internet are looking for someone to tear down. They're looking for somebody to expose. They're looking to find the flaws. Oh, this person says they're good. Well, I can discover that they once tweeted this bad. That's what people on the internet want. But if we're going to get serious, we have to find a way that we can connect with the part within the broad masses that wants a hero. All right? That's what do you think Stalin was? What do you think Lenin was? I mean, they were a hero, right? It was about giving the people a hero, someone they could believe in, right? Stalin means man of steel, right? The reason that Lenin had this mustache, right? He had a goatee, he was bald and had a goatee, was because back then they didn't have very, very clear printing on posters. They didn't have facial details very, very much. But everyone knew that if you saw a bald guy with a goatee on a poster, that was Lenin. And the reason Stalin had a handlebar was because, again, they didn't have, complex printing on posters, but everybody knew that the guy with the handlebar, that's Stalin, right? And I'm sure there's another political leader you can think about, and obviously, he probably adopted his unique mustache for the same reason. But again, it was because, the broad masses, they want to feel like there's somebody powerful who's on their side. And again, there's that doomer mindset we have on the internet where everyone's bad, everyone's a phony. If somebody good comes along, it's like, well, they can't really be good. There's got to be something wrong with them. That's not real politics. And if you really want to capture the energy of the broad masses of people, you need to find something they can believe in. And honestly, we need to find the good in people they already like Abraham Lincoln, right? The broad masses of people already think highly of Abraham Lincoln. And so it's our job not to go Abraham Lincoln. No, we need to say, oh, well, Marx liked Abraham Lincoln too. Right? That's what we should be saying to the broad masses. You like Abraham Lincoln. He was a progressive figure in American history, defeated the slaveholders. So do we. And here's some common ground. And we can show you ways that Lincoln was good that Marx pointed to. And we can teach you to think like a Marxist while we're agreeing with you about Lincoln being good. That's how this generally works, right? Roosevelt, right? Now, obviously, Roosevelt is a complex figure, but Roosevelt and Lincoln are the two most beloved presidents in U.S. history, and they're the two most pro-communist presidents in U.S. history. Lincoln had a communist general in his army named August Willich. Lincoln, he made Harriet Tubman the first woman to lead U.S. soldiers into battle. He was friends with Frederick Douglass. He was endorsed by Karl Marx. So the fact that they've done polls and Americans overwhelmingly say that Lincoln and Roosevelt were the two greatest presidents, that's a good sign. And we should go to the Americans who like Lincoln and say, well, you like Lincoln. Well, you know what? We like him too. And here's what we can agree with you on and get you to think like us by liking him. And the same with Roosevelt. Americans like Roosevelt. Rather than going, well, Roosevelt wasn't a true... No, Roosevelt was supporting the labor movement. Roosevelt stood up to Wall Street. He aligned with the Soviet Union. And we can go to Americans who like Roosevelt and get them to understand, by agreeing with them, get them to see that they share some of our values. You have to approach these things. Why do you think Simon Bolivar was a communist? Do you think Simon Bolivar was a Marxist? Of course he wasn't, right? He was a bourgeois nationalist who was against, he was a bourgeois revolutionary in Latin America, fighting against colonialism. And, but he was against slavery, and he was for the independence of South America. And there are a lot of very good values in Simon Bolivar's writing. So rather than telling the people of Venezuela, fuck Simon Bolivar, we're for communism, the communists of Latin America said, we're going to form a Bolivarian socialist movement. And it worked. This is how you actually get things done. And if you read Mao's writings, right? If you read the writings during the Second World War, Stalin was always making movies glorifying Alexander Nevsky and Ivan the Terrible and great figures in Russian history who had defeated foreign invaders and unified the lands, right? And Mao, right? Mao was very much inspired by the Taiping uprising. And even now, the Chinese Communist Party very much draws heavily and promotes Confucianism and Confucian values. I mean, you have to understand, you can't just declare war on everything that people believe. You can't just declare war on everything people believe and say, everything you believe is wrong, abandon all your beliefs and become a true communist now, or F you. If you do that, you should just give up. At that point, just give up, right? If you're going to tell people that everything they believe, everything they stand for, then you're going to get very, very, very few people. But if you can find things that people already believe, find common ground with them and point them in the right direction, if you can appeal to values, good values that people already have, you can appeal to the part of American people that likes Superman for good reasons, right? Instead of telling the American people that they should hate Superman and like Lex Luthor, find what it is in the American people that makes them like Superman that's good. Find the good in Superman that they like and get them to understand that that's linked to communism. That's the approach that we have to have, right? And we need to get serious about this, right? Bob Dylan, he said, let us not speak falsely now. The hour's getting late. And the hour is getting late. But that's okay. I'm still on here and I'm having a great time. We're having a great time. If there's something you want me to talk about, shoot me a super chat. That's how we roll. I'll be giving short answers and long answers, etc. Generals tied to the presidency. There have been many military leaders who've been U.S. presidents. I mean, George Washington, the first founder of the United States. Thank you, Gleb, for the super chat. George Washington, he was a military leader in the British Army in the French and Indian War, and then later he was the first president. Andrew Jackson was a military leader, I believe, right? Andrew Jackson was a military leader, and he was president of the United States. He committed genocide against the native people. He had the removal, right, where he forcibly deported it was ethnic cleansing. He forcibly deported all the Native Americans from the east of the Mississippi River. It was a pretty horrendous thing to do. And the Supreme Court told Andrew Jackson he couldn't do it, and he said, oh, well, then the Supreme Court can enforce that, and he just did it anyway, violating the Constitution. But you also have Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was a progressive. He had won the Civil War, and he was, he sent federal troops to fight the Ku Klux Klan. He stood up for Native Americans. He was, on the progressive side of American history. Who else do we have? I mean, Dwight Eisenhower was a big general during World War II, and they made him into, they made Dwight Eisenhower into a political leader, and he was kind of a moderate Republican. He kind of tamed the Republican Party down and got it out of McCarthyism. We've had various presidents that are military leaders for sure. How did the wars of religion contribute to modern capitalism? Oh, that's a good question. Wars of religion contribute to modern capitalism. All right, and there's another one I gotta write down after that. Hold on. Is Lula worth supporting in Brazil? All righty. Okay. Sudan. As I have emphasized, the United States has been working very, very hard to destabilize and try and destroy Sudan. The USA broke away the South Sudan in coordination with Israel. The USA has been backing the destabilization, and there's been a long-standing effort by the United States to, play up the divide between Christians and Muslims in Sudan, weaken Sudan, because there's a fear that Sudan could become an independent economic country, right? And the USA has destabilized very, very effectively Sudan and weakened Sudan. And that's what's going on there. There you go. Are many degreed professionals not workers? Okay, here's the thing. All right, so this is not it's not a simple thing, right? Generally, when we talk about class in Marxism, we divide between those who work for a living and those who own for a living. There's those who own the means of production. They're the capitalists. There are those who sell their labor power to survive. Those are the workers. But, okay, it gets a little tricky, all right? In a factory, it's very clearly laid out. The factory owner is the capitalist. The factory worker is the worker. Okay, but then the question comes, okay, what about a nanny? Right? What about a nanny, right? She takes care of children, but she's not producing surplus value, right? She's not making a product. She's just performing a service, but she is selling her labor power. And Marx says, okay, she's technically a proletarian, even though she's not a productive worker. She's not a productive worker. She's a service worker. A janitor who cleans a building. Again, he's not creating a product. He's not creating surplus value, but he is selling his labor, and it is necessary to have that janitor to have a business. And that business that has him clean it, is calculating the cost of hiring him into their ultimate profit margin. So, okay, you can have workers that are not, quote-unquote, productive workers, and they're not creating value in the form of products, but they are selling their labor power. then it starts to get tricky. What about the manager? Okay, at the factory, right? The factory workers, you got a factory full of productive workers. We're on the assembly line putting surplus value into the product. But then the capitalist hires somebody whose job is not to work on the assembly line, but it's to, crack the whip and make sure everybody shows up. The manager. Now, is the manager a worker? Marx would say no. The manager is what you call an agent because he is driving the worker to produce more surplus value. A police officer, right? Again, a police officer, right? Is he selling his labor power? Well, I mean, he gets a paycheck, right? I mean, he clocks in, clocks out, but what's he doing? He's enforcing and defending the property of the capitalist. He's what you call an agent. Right? He's not a capitalist, but his job is not to produce surplus value, and he's not performing a service for the capitalist. Rather, he's enforcing. He's enforcing. The enforcer of the capitalist order, the manager, the boss at your office, for example, the police officer, that's what you call an agent. Is a mom-and-pop bakery considered means of production? Well, a mom-and-pop bakery is what you'd call the petty bourgeois, or the middle, the lower-level capitalists. They own their own business, but they're not part of the ruling class, right? They're technically owning their own means of production, but they're subservient to banks and dependent on banks. The banks are exploiting them to make profits over interest, and they don't run the government, they don't run the politicians, they don't run the states. That's what you call the petty bourgeoisie, the small business owner, and a lot of times professionals are what you would consider to be petty bourgeois. And I think that's what Haas and Hinkle were getting at, right? That a lawyer who has his own practice, right, he's petty bourgeois. He's his own boss, right? He sells his labor power, but he doesn't sell it. He sells it. He doesn't sell it to an individual boss who exploits him to make profits. He rather, he's making, and then a doctor, right? A doctor. Right? But then you get situations where, like, what about that lawyer who works for a big law firm? And at the end of the day, the law firm pays him a wage. And the law firm just pays him a wage, and the owner, the partners in the law firm get all the profits. I mean, is he a proletarian? Yes, but because he's a lawyer, because he has a law license, right? He can practice law. He's passed the bar. He doesn't have to be. He has, it's kind of like he has a skill, a professional skill, but he's still a proletarian. What about a doctor who works at like a big hospital? Okay, right? He doesn't have his own practice, right? He doesn't have his own shingle with his name on it. He's, Dr. Stephen, Dr. Smith, or whatever, right? He's actually working at a big hospital, gets a paycheck from a hospital, but he has a medical degree. He could have his own practice if he wanted to. And because of that, the hospital has to pay him more and such. But technically, in relationship to that big law firm or that big hospital, he's a proletarian. But, he has professional skills. And some people even argue that about college professors, right? That a college professor, okay, technically he's a proletarian because he's selling his time and his labor power to the college. But, he, has a degree. He's got his PhD, I guess. And he's got, and so it gets tricky with professionals. It gets tricky. But ultimately, the petty bourgeoisie generally refers to people who own their own business, who own their own means of production, like mom and pop bakery, like your friend Joe, the bar owner. That is petty bourgeois. But are professionals petty bourgeois? In Marx's day, they most definitely were. In Marx's day, most doctors had their own practice. Most lawyers had their own practice. Nowadays, a lot of professionals don't. A lot of professionals don't nowadays, right? So it's tricky, right? A lot of professionals have been more or less proletarianized, though because they have, a professional skill, they're not proletarianized in the same way. They can get a little more for their labor. And in some cases, they have like professional associations that will protect them. In a lot of cases, they have contracts at their jobs. They're not hired at will. They have a contract. So it's tricky. It's tricky. But ultimately, I know what they're getting at. I would argue that it depends on a case-by-case basis. And that, look, many people have pointed out that, one of the aspects of the labor aristocracy, the labor aristocrat, right, that's the aristocracy of labor, a big aspect of the labor aristocracy in the United States was you had a factory worker in the United States, a steel worker, an auto worker, who is a proletarian gaining property, right? That, okay, he's a proletarian, but he has his house. and he has his lawn, and he has his car, and that throughout history, proletarians generally don't own anything. They don't own a house. They don't own a car. They rent where they live. They have no property. Proletarian, in ancient Rome, the proletariat were the class with nothing but their children, the procreating class. They didn't own anything except their kids. Well, part of what cultivated the aristocracy of labor mindset on the part of the working class, during the good old days, the 50s, right? During the boom of imperialism, the post-World War II economic expansion, was that millions of proletarians got little pieces of property. And that in a lot of cases, the right-wing politics from working class people, the pro-war, anti-civil rights politics, anti-civil rights, pro-war, racism, etc., was based on communists want to take your little piece of property because you have your house. You have your house and your car, and you own it, and it's yours. You're a property owner just like the ruling class. Well, you're not just like the ruling class, right? You're not, but it creates the illusion that you are, right? And that's part of the law enforcement are always agents. Doesn't that mean that other first responders are agents also? Oh, I wouldn't say that. I mean, they're performing a necessary service, right? I mean, they're not just enforcing property relations, right? A firefighter is rescuing people who might be in flames. That's a necessary service, right? I mean, that's just like a nanny. You need somebody to take care of kids. You need people to rescue people in flames. That's a little bit different. I mean, they're not enforcing property relations. They're rescuing people, right? And the same with like first responders, right? I mean, they're not enforcing property relations. That's when someone has a heart attack, they try to rescue them and take them to the hospital. I think it's a completely different thing. But the labor aristocracy, part of the labor aristocracy mindset is giving people a little piece of property so they identify with the property class. And that's a big part of it. And that's part of it. And you'll notice now that's largely becoming a thing of the past. I mean, families are losing their homes. I mean, during the financial crisis, people lost their homes all across the country. And that increasingly Americans overwhelmingly are renting their homes. The next generation of kids with their student debt, they're never going to be able to have a mortgage for a house, right? How are you going to get a mortgage for a house if you've already got, you got $10,000, $20,000 of student debt? And then you're going to go to the bank and be like, oh, okay, give me a loan for, to buy a house. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. The home ownership thing is a thing of the past. But, lawn care, the fetish for lawn care in the United States, right, which is it's a sick fetish of middle America, right, is you're going to mow your lawn perfectly. You're going to have exactly the right pesticides. It's going to be perfectly green. Your lawn is going to look like a golf course. And your neighbors are all going to look at your little perfect lawn and they're going to be like jealous. Wow, you have got an amazing lawn and my yard is full of weeds and dandelions. But you have created a paradise in front of your home. That is, the lawn care fetish of U.S. society. That is a big part of bourgeoisification, right? It's a big part of trying to cultivate the capitalist mindset among the worker. And much has been written about this. I remember I actually listened. There was years ago. I don't remember who wrote it, but there was a Marxist analysis of lawn care. I actually went to a lecture, a Marxist analysis of lawn care. Might be too early to know is what might happen in the 2024 presidential election. I'm predicting Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party candidate. I'm predicting Trump as the Republican candidate. I'm predicting Andrew Yang as the Forward Party candidate. That's my prediction. All right. Isn't law enforcement a necessary service just with unnecessary aspects, since law enforcement often helps and saves people? That's a good point, Sando. That's a good point. I think that the reason that they're seen as enforcing capitalist property relations is they're protecting capitalist property. They arrest striking workers. But yes, and a lot of what cops do is, you would have to have cops in a socialist society, right? There would have to be some form of law enforcement. So in that sense, it's definitely a necessary service. And sure, but under capitalism, these institutions, the state, right, the body of armed men tends to serve the class that's in power. But ultimately, in theory, law enforcement is supposed to just be a necessary service. But unfortunately, we've learned throughout the history of the United States that it's not. It does enforce the rules of society, and we would like to build new institutions over the course of changing society. We'd like to build a new kind of policing apparatus, and, new bodies that serve the working class rather than serving, the property owner class of our society. We want to change things, and we need to be sensible. Look, I used to say awful things about police. I don't say that anymore, right? I obviously recognize that under capitalism, the police are enforcers of the capitalist order, but there's a lot of good people who are cops, right? And that, when we say things like abolish the police, that's not rational. To average Americans, that doesn't make any sense, right? When you press people who say abolish police, what they say is, well, we want to build up some new institution that can play the role. And so you're not really saying abolish police, you're saying abolish capitalism. So just say abolish capitalism. Don't say abolish police, because if you say abolish police, then people think there's no police. And it's midnight at my house, and the robber is breaking in. What do I do? Well, at the end of the day, right, in a socialist society, there are going to be police, right? And that police themselves are not the problem. The problem is the system that they serve, right? And the idea is that moving towards socialism means creating a new state apparatus, and new forms of police, and new forms of military, and new forms of intelligence, etc., in order to enforce the new order, right? And so, we want to talk about this in a nuanced, kind of sensible way, and a lot of just the shrill rhetoric of the left, F the police and all of that. There was a time in my life I talked that way. I don't think that's the right way to talk anymore. I don't. I regret having done that because I feel like many people couldn't relate to that. And by talking that way, I alienated such people. And honestly, there may be people who are on the police force who don't like what they're doing. But there you go. Anyway. Okay. Bill Ayers, did I ever meet him? Twice in my life. Well, 3 times in my life I have encountered him. The first time I encountered Bill Ayers was I was in Chicago, and I was leafleting, and he was still a professor at that point. I was leafleting at his college, and he saw me handing out leaflets about socialism. He said, "Oh, I agree, socialism," and walked by, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's Bill Ayers. He's shorter than you'd think." I saw him again at the U.S. Social Forum, and he was walking around with a group of 20-year-olds around him, and he's still got this I think he still thinks he's a hippie. He's moving his body slow, like he's a cool guy. That's how Bill Ayers is. And then he was being interviewed someplace that I was, and so I saw him again then. I probably met him 3 times in my life. Oh, and one time I was at Riverside Church, and it was years ago. I was at Riverside Church, and Angela Davis was speaking, and Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers were both there. And they were angry. Bernadine Dorn was angry with somebody, and she was in the lobby as I was outside trying to hand out leaflets, and she was in the lobby. She and Bill Ayers were in the lobby arguing with somebody outside the event. The event was ending. I was in the lobby handing out leaflets to people as they were walking out, and Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers were having an argument in the lobby also. So there you go. I mean, it's a weird question. That's my interaction with them. And honestly, I'm not too impressed. I'll just be real. I will tell you, I knew about the Bill Ayers Obama connection before anybody else. And, I don't talk about my family very much here. I don't. But I'll say this. I will tell this story, right? I'm not going to say much about my family other than this. 2008, I was a college student. I was a member of the Workers' World Party. And I went home to see my family. And I told my parents, I said, Barack Obama, who's running for president, he lives in the same apartment building as Bill Ayers. And my parents said, "Who's Bill Ayers?" I said, "Bill Ayers was the leader of the Weather Underground organization in the 1960s, this radical communist group that blew stuff up." Well, they knew who the Weather Underground were. And they said, "That's not true." I said, "Yes, it is true, and it's going to be all over the news pretty soon." And they said, "No, it's not. No, it's not. That's crazy. That's crazy. That wouldn't." They just rolled their eyes. They thought, "Oh, that's crazy." And then, that fall, I came home, and I said, "Yeah, remember Bill Ayers?" I was right. I knew about the Bill Ayers thing long before everybody did, because I knew people that were in radical circles in Chicago, and anyone who'd hung out with the radical movement in Chicago knew that Bill Ayers isn't a revolutionary anymore. He's just this liberal Democrat, and he's wealthy, and he's whatever, and he lived in the same apartment building as Barack Obama, and it means absolutely nothing. But I knew about it before anybody did, and I said, Republicans are going to find out about this, and it's going to be a big deal. And my parents didn't believe me, and my brother didn't believe me, and they just thought, oh, that's Caleb being crazy communist again. And lo and behold, I was right. But, no one keeps track of these things except for me. But anyhow, so there you go. There's my Bill Ayers story. I don't know why you wanted to ask me about Bill Ayers. It's pretty funny. I don't know. I should try not to comment on individuals too much, right? I try not to, whatever. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Bill Ayers is watching right now. I really doubt it, but there you go. There you go. There you go. All right. The U.S. definition of political prisoners. Well, okay, so, all right, so according to the U.S. government, there are no political prisoners here. All right, it's kind of like that whole thing with, what did Margaret Thatcher say during the IRA thing? There's no such thing as political murder, political arson, political theft, political robbery. Crime is crime. And it's like the U.S. government probably says that too. They say, well, there's nothing special about, it doesn't matter that it was political, what the Black Liberation Army did or these people did. It doesn't matter that it was political, right? Crime is crime. We're just enforcing the law. But you'll notice that, go watch the movie Through the Wire. This is a documentary that won some awards in the 80s, Through the Wire, and how there is a special facility in the basement of a women's prison, where they had members of the Puerto Rican armed groups and members of the May 19th Communist Organization, and they were doing psychological experiments and stuff. The U.S. government doesn't treat these people just like other prisoners, right? These people get special treatment. Read what they've done to Jamil Al-Amin. The political prisoners get special treatment. So if there's nothing special about them, why do they get treated that way? Planet of the Apes. I think the point of Planet of the Apes, right, is, all right, so it's Charlton Heston, right, the original movie. Charlton Heston, and they crash land on this planet where the humans are slaves and the apes are the masters. At the end of the movie, he discovers that it's Earth. It's like, oh my God, it was Earth all along. And that's how the movie ends. And I think it's an analogy. It's like, I think if anything, and this really sounds awful, honestly, and this shows how racist, but, Charlton Heston was a right-wing dude, right? He was certainly a right-wing fellow, and I think it was probably the fears of middle America that the third world would win the Cold War, right? That Vietnam and Africa and Asia would rise up and overthrow, and that we, the white people that ruled the world, would suddenly be the slaves, right? And it was probably a racist projection. That's probably what it was. I don't think it's never directly stated, but it's like, that was probably underlying it on some subconscious level, right? And the other thing is that there's many sequels to it, right? There's what is it? Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and one of them has like an ape revolutionary, right? An ape that's like Che Guevara, and it has you like cheering for the apes against the humans. The humans are the enemies. And it's like you're cheering for the apes who are oppressed, right? They've bred a special kind of ape that can talk or something, but they're oppressing them and they're treating them badly, and so they're breaking out of their cages and they're rising up and revolting, and you're cheering for the apes. And it was one of the sequels, and you watch it, the apes are the heroes, and the apes are supposed to be communists, basically. That's pretty neat. So yeah, it's a reflection, very much of, and it's a lot like, Charlton Heston, I've talked on here before. He made a movie called The Last Man on Earth. And it was also this weird kind of like middle America hating the 60s. It's that Okie from Muskogee. Middle America is afraid of communists and the civil rights movement. And, that's Charlton Heston. He was making movies in the early 70s. It was that kind of Nixon mindset. And I think Planet of the Apes, right? They're astronauts, they're out in space, and they land on this planet, and they get to this planet, and the humans are slaves, and the apes are the rulers, and what is going on here, and it's Earth, and it's like, oh my God, this is how it could be. I don't know. I see it as projection. I see it as kind of racist projection, basically, and fear of third world revolution. And it's almost painful to say that they would dehumanize, that they would get to the point where they see the people in the third world as not human. But that's how a lot of racists are. I mean, that's no secret about that. And it's this fear, this fear that the people in the developing world are not human, and they're going to be taking over, and we the humans will be the suppressed ones. And that's kind of like what you see in the Omega Man also, right? I mean, the original text of the book, right? The book that the Omega Man is based on is called I Am Legend. And right at one point at the end, he talks about how vampires used to be the legend, but now the human is the legend, right? And that he will be the human is the legend, right? He'll be what the children are told about by their parents at night. The vampires have become normal, and the human has become the mythical creature. That's the point, right? And I think that's, again, it's the world is changing. Our old America that used to be so good is slipping away. These are right-wing ideas, right? And these are right-wing racist ideas, right? And that's what I Am Legend is getting at also, right? That the human becomes the mythical creature. And I mean, it's awful, honestly. And that's why, we need class solidarity, because, I mean, that kind of mindset is very toxic. Look what people do when they adopt that kind of mindset. It's toxic, very, very toxic. Facebook's now called Meta. Oh boy. Oh boy. That changes everything now, doesn't it? That makes it all okay. And we're going to enter this metaverse, right? Did you see Mark Zuckerberg had that video where he's talking about virtual reality and the metaverse? And oh dear. Oh dear. Every horror sci-fi movie you've ever seen is coming true. Brought to you by Capitalism. Just kidding. But there you go. High gas prices. Very easy. Why the high gas prices? During the pandemic, the oil prices dropped very significantly. Like the first day, as we were just starting to lock down here in New York, I was reporting. You can go back. I was reporting from the stock exchange. Because on the stock exchange, the oil prices dropped, like just tanked. And the reason that they tanked was because the world economy was slowing down and there wasn't as much demand. So now the world economy is starting to come back, but the supply had slowed down. And so, now all of a sudden they need to start pumping more gas and they need to start pumping more oil because there's way more demand. People are traveling again. People are doing stuff again. So as a result, because there's a lot less oil being supplied, the value of that oil has gone up. And so now the oil prices are high because there's less on the market. And so now they need to start supplying more so then the price gets back to normal. And Russia's stepped up and saved the day. This is supply and demand, folks. That's what it's about. And the supply is now catching up with the demand. And that's the supply chain. Like, that's the whole thing with all of this, right? The demand had decreased, and now demand is rising again. People are doing things again. People are having parties again. And so it's like they had slowed down the amount of alcohol they were producing. They had slowed down all this stuff. And now people are having parties again. People are taking airplane rides again. People are driving places again. All of a sudden, people are doing stuff again. So, now we have to increase the supply to catch up with the demand that is now rising again. There you go. Afghan trap. Zbigniew Brzezinski gave an interview where he told the French newspaper that the idea in Afghanistan was to give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam. That was the idea. Give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam, create a situation where the Soviet Union felt it had to intervene in Afghanistan, or it had to send its military into Afghanistan. That was the idea. There we go. How did the wars of religion contribute to modern capitalism? Well, look, the Protestant Reformation was a big moment in the birth of capitalism, right? The Protestant Reformation, in many ways, laid the basis for the emergence of modern capitalism. And the wars that resulted from the Protestant Reformation were largely class wars, okay? They weren't really having a war about what does communion mean, and no, they were having a war about class, right? And it was the rising capitalist class of Germany and such that were, and that were supporting Martin Luther and John Calvin and others. It was the rising capitalist class that were rising up. And in France, what was the big Protestant movement? It was the Huguenots. The Huguenots, that's who I'm descended from. It's why I have a French last name. I'm descended from Huguenots. Well, they were capitalists. They were capitalists and they were Protestants, because Catholicism was associated with the feudal order. And so you had the Huguenots, and the Huguenots were crushed and forced out of France and expelled. And in my case, they were expelled to Northern Ireland. And that's why I have an Irish ancestry, but a French last name, right? And the wars surrounding the Protestant Reformation, you're saying wars of religion, contributed to the modern capitalism era. Excited about your trip to Managua. Will we get a patron-only stream prior to your departure? Yes, you will get a patron-only stream. That'll be on the 1st of November. Remember the 1st of November. Absolutely. So sign up now if you want to be a patron, want to be on that patrons-only stream. Sign up down below. And will I do lives from Nicaragua? As much as I possibly can. I don't know about how much my phone and stuff will work there, but that's the plan. That is the plan. That's the plan, to do lives from Nicaragua. So wish me luck on that. I wrote it down, Chomsky. I wrote it down. But yeah, the wars surrounding the Protestant Reformation laid the basis for modern capitalism. That's true. And, they talk about the Crusades. They brought some knowledge and information back to Europe, and the Knights Templar, and that laid the basis also. So there you go. Is Lula in Brazil worth supporting? Absolutely. He's way more anti-imperialist than he was before he went to prison. He's praising North Korea now. They framed him up and they railroaded him to jail with a sham trial where the judge and the prosecutor were texting each other. And now he's out and he's fired up. He may not be a communist. He may not be a Marxist-Leninist, but he's Lula. It's not the same Lula. He's much more radical. They put him in prison. And now, if Lula were to get elected president of Brazil, I think he would dramatically change things. But would they let it happen? I mean, this guy, Bolsonaro, is tied to death squads and assassins and killers and stuff. I don't know if they would let him take office, because at this point, the fact that he was railroaded to jail, and at this point, Lula would come back in with a vengeance. I'll tell you that much. There you go. Noam Chomsky. Well, like I said, Noam Chomsky is often referred to as the most widely quoted source in the English language after the Bible. And why is that? He was quoted in Soviet media, right? That went all over the world. And that in the Soviet Union and in many parts of the world, people thought Noam Chomsky was a household name in the United States. But he wasn't. Most outside of leftist activist circles, people never heard of him. And then Noam Chomsky very much played the role as, it was kind of good cop and bad cop. And Noam Chomsky, during the Soviet era, he represented, the quote-unquote good side of U.S. foreign policy. And I will say that Noam Chomsky's international politics during the Soviet years were much better. When it came to Nicaragua, when it came to the Middle East, during the Soviet years, he would, when it came to Nicaragua, when it came to Cuba, he would, defend anti-imperialist states, be critical of U.S. policy. Now Chomsky, when it comes to Syria, he said the USA doesn't want to overthrow Assad because it's afraid of the revolution. That's bullshit. The USA clearly wants to overthrow Assad. When it came to Libya, he was so wrong on Libya. And that Chomsky, many people have pointed out, it's an odd coincidence that Amy Goodman, Noam Chomsky, and a lot of voices seem to follow the Al Jazeera line. Right? If you watch Al Jazeera represents the Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey, and Qatar. Right? And they're an axis in Middle Eastern politics. You have the anti-imperialist forces, Iran and its allies. And then you have the Saudis and the Wahhabis. But then you have this other axis, which is centered around Turkey and Qatar. That's where Amy Goodman and Noam Chomsky are, right? They're, anti-Israel, right? They will critique Israel. They will refer to Hamas as the recognized government of the Palestinians. They're favoring negotiations with Iran, but they're not fully anti-imperialist, but they're not fully pro-imperialist either. They're critical of Israel. They're critical of the United States. They're critical of Saudi Arabia. It's that Muslim Brotherhood Al Jazeera line. That's where Chomsky and Amy Goodman tend to be when you press them, especially on Middle Eastern politics. They have the Al Jazeera, Qatar, Turkey line. I don't know why that is. You can watch the video of my confrontation or my interaction with Chomsky, where I asked him about Iran, where I confronted him about the assassination of nuclear scientists in Iran. And Noam Chomsky answered my question using the 4 Ds of dodgeball. Dip, dodge, duck, and dodge. That's how he answered my question, because he basically said I was right, but he didn't give me the quote I needed. Why? Because he was at the UN at the request of the Arab League. They invited him there. The Arab League paid for Noam Chomsky, probably paid him a huge amount of money. I don't know how much they paid him. I really doubt he went there for free. And they brought him to the UN to give a talk against Israel. And I was there as a UN reporter, and my job was to, ask him a question. So I thought, why don't I ask him about, he's talking about Israel, why don't we talk about Israel killing nuclear scientists? And he knew that, the Arab League doesn't like Iran, and so if he were to condemn crimes against Iran, that would be dissing his hosts. And so he, like a pro, he's been doing this for years. Chomsky's a pro. He knows how to handle it, right? He knows how to handle it. He gave me the answer that I could not use. And he answered my question with dip, dodge, duck, and dodge, the 4 Ds of dodgeball. And you can watch it. Type in Caleb Maupin, Noam Chomsky on YouTube. You can watch it, right? Where he basically admits I was right, but does it in a way that I cannot, I cannot use. So there you go. There you go, folks. Wild night, isn't it? Wild night. All right, folks. I think this is where the show ends for tonight. So I wish you all a good evening. It's been fun. And on that note, we will end the way we always do. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.